Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Chicago, Fall 2022. Dead leaves swirled through the streets like memories refusing to settle. They carpeted the sidewalks in a patchwork of ochre and brown, slipping beneath the hurried steps of men and women bundled up in their coats. A cold wind whistled between the buildings, carrying the smell of rain, metal, and loneliness. It was a little after 8 in the morning, and Chicago was waking up in that dull light that only autumn can cast, neither full of promise nor entirely hopeless. Distant horns, barking dogs, and anonymous whispers created an urban soundtrack that no one was really listening to anymore. In an alley adjacent to the 61st Street Market, a pile of soggy cardboard boxes served as a bed for a curled-up figure. A woman of a certain age, her skin cracked by the cold, her nails black with grime, her eyes ringed with fatigue. She was there every morning. Unchanged. Like a part of the city that no one had really placed there, but that everyone accepted as a given. Her coat, too big for her, seemed to have swallowed her whole. A hand-knitted hat, worn to the very last, covered her matted gray hair. She wore fingerless woolen gloves, revealing hands worn by time and hardship. At her feet, a cracked plastic cup. Inside, a few coins, absent-mindedly thrown in, out of guilt or reflex. We called him Mama June, a nickname that came out of nowhere, but stuck to her. Some nodded at her, others avoided her gaze. But no one really stopped. No one spoke to her. She had become invisible. A ghost of the city. And yet, that morning, something changed. An black SUV with tinted windows slowly approached the curb. The vehicle stood out starkly against the dilapidated surroundings, like an intruder in an oil painting. It stopped silently, the engine barely purring, as if fate itself were holding its breath. The rear door opened with almost ceremonial slowness. And a man got out. Tall, slender, and with a noble bearing. He wore a long, charcoal gray cashmere coat and a midnight blue silk scarf tied neatly around his neck. His Italian shoes shone despite the puddles. In his hand, a platinum Swiss watch worth more than everything the residents of this neighborhood owned combined. He walked with natural ease, an elegant gravity. But his eyes betrayed something else. Attention. An inner call. He seemed oblivious to the street, nor the curious glances that fell upon him. He was looking for something. Or someone. His name was Richard Coleman's. 39-year-old Richard was what financial magazines called a self-made billionaire. CEO of Solemn Tech, a leader in renewable energy, he grew up in a loving adoptive family and then rose through the ranks at breakneck speed. He was voted Man of the Year by Forbes, decorated by the government for his ecological commitments, invited onto all television sets. But on this cold, gray day in 2022, none of that mattered. Because Richard hadn't come here as a billionaire. He hadn't come for a fundraiser or a TED Talk. He had come in sons. A son searching for a face. A look. A story. A truth he had repressed for years. A pain lodged so deeply that it had guided his every step, even unconsciously. And as he met the gaze of this woman sitting in the cold, he knew. He knew it wasn't a dream. It was not an illusion. It was her. He walked slowly toward the old woman, without saying a word. Each step seemed to weigh a ton, as if the past were weighing him down the closer he got to her. He felt his heart pound in his chest, not from fear, but from a kind of dizziness. An invisible boundary was drawn between his previous life and this moment. She, huddled against a damp wall, only looked up at the last second, alerted by the shadow that had darkened the light in front of her. At first surprised, she frowned. Her pupils, faded by years and fatigue, took time to adjust. He wore a face she didn't immediately recognize. But his eyes were hers. They looked at each other. For a long time. And in that suspended silence, even the sounds of the city seemed to have stopped, the engines had fallen silent, the horns had died down, and even the wind was holding its breath. as if the entire universe was witnessing a scene it dared not disturb. "Do you have some coins?" she finally whispered, in a hoarse, almost extinguished voice, as if she were mechanically repeating this sentence, without really believing it. But he didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched gently in front of her, down to eye level. The simple gesture of a rich man kneeling in a dirty alleyway turned a few heads. But he didn't care. The asphalt was cold, his knees protested beneath the fabric of his trousers, but he didn't move. He looked at his mother. "Is your name June Holloway?" he asked in a calm, almost fragile voice. She stiffened. Her shoulders trembled. Her gaze hardened, wary, like a wounded animal being approached. "Who's asking?" she replied defensively. Richard hesitated. He briefly closed his eyes, took a breath, then reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out an old, laminated photograph, creased at the edges. He unfolded it carefully, as if he were holding a treasure or irrefutable proof in his hands. "It's you," he said, handing her the image. "And that is me." June reached out slowly, as if afraid to touch a lie. Her fingers, thin and damaged, brushed against the plastic. She took the photo. She stared at it for a long time. The world around her faded. The young woman in the picture was definitely her. She remembered it. That pale yellow dress, that summer day, that baby in her arms. Her baby. She raised her hand to her mouth. Her lips trembled. Her gaze moved from the photo to the man kneeling before her. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. And yet. "Richard." Her voice broke. She dropped the photo. Her breath came in ragged gasps. He nodded, his eyes moist. "You are my mother." These words, simple and clear, hit June like a shock. Her legs gave way. She literally collapsed toward him, not from exhaustion, but like a dam bursting under the weight of accumulated emotions. She was crying, heavy sobs, deep, ancient. Those of a mother who had carried a living mourning for decades. He caught her in his arms, without hesitation. He held her close, with a tenderness he didn't even know existed within him. She smelled damp, cold, abandoned, but she was real. And she was there. All around, passers-by had stopped. Some were filming, others watched silently. But no one spoke. Because they were witnessing something sacred. A son found. A resurrected mother. And amidst the asphalt, the debris, and the concrete, love springs forth. Raw. Unexpected. Authentic. The past of June Holloway was a long corridor of pain, heartbreaking choices, and imposed silences. As 22 years old, she still carried within her the dreams of the little girl she had been Flint, in Michigan. Bright, sweet, and always willing to help, she had enrolled in nursing school in Detroit Mercy with the hope of changing lives. She dreamed of a white uniform, a badge with the name, June Holloway, RN, and a modest apartment all to herself. She wanted to prove to her family, strict, ultra-religious, and reluctant to tolerate female empowerment, that she could succeed without a man, without an imposed husband. But life is often crueler than dreams. It was in this same hospital, during a night shift, that she met Dr. Gregory Langston, an experienced, attractive, charismatic doctor, and married. She knew it was forbidden. She knew she shouldn't get attached. But he had the sweet words, the warmth, the attention she'd never received. In her loneliness, she'd confused attention with love. And when she told him she was pregnant, it was as if a room had collapsed on top of her. He became cold and distant. He called her a liar, then accused her of trying to destroy his career. 3 days later, he asked the management to transfer her to another hospital. June was alone. When she returned to her parents' house to seek support, her mother slapped her. Her father, a Baptist church pastor, literally slammed the door in her face. "You're a disgrace, June. You're not our daughter anymore. Rejected. Pregnant. Destitute." She returned to Detroit and sold everything she owned. Then, in a last-ditch effort to survive, she boarded a Greyhound bus to Chicago. She found refuge in a women's shelter during the last months of her pregnancy. There, between crumbling walls and barely warm meals, she gave birth alone, with no one to hold her hand. The baby she gave birth to was beautiful. Mixed race, with caramel-colored skin and deep brown eyes. She named him Richard, named after her grandfather, the only man who had ever loved her unconditionally. But after just a few weeks, June realized the obvious: she couldn't offer him a life. Not in this state. Not in this misery. She didn't even have enough money to buy him powdered milk. She saw him crying, his stomach empty, and her heart broke a little more every day. So, one January morning, as snow covered the sidewalks of Bronzeville, she wrapped him in the only blanket she owned, laid him out in front of a Baptist church, St. Emmanuel's Church, and slipped into his basket a note, handwritten in shaky handwriting. "My name is June. I have nothing. But I love him. Take care of him. One day he'll understand." Then she left, without looking back. But every step away from her baby was a heartbreak. An abandonment. A guilt she never stopped carrying like a cross. Since that day she wandered from one shelter to another. Years passed. Her body weakened. Her mind too. She lost her papers, her identity, until she became just Mama June, that broken, forgotten woman, sitting every day on the same street corner, with her holy gloves and her memories as her only wealth. During this time, Richard, raised by Paul E. Clarice Anderson, a mixed-race couple from Milwaukee, he a white pastor, she an African-American teacher, had grown up in love, but not without questions. He had it all: a private education, books galore, solid values. But the void remained there. Elusive. On Christmas nights, when everyone was laughing around the fire, he would retire to his room and stare at the ceiling. Why? Who left me? Did she love me? The Andersons told him he had been found in the church, in a basket, like Moses on the water. But he didn't want a myth. He wanted the truth. And it was years later, after the death of his adoptive father, while sorting through his things, he discovered a black Bible, worn, annotated. Inside, between the Gospel according to Luke and the Book of Job, a sheet folded in four. A yellowed paper, barely legible, but on which he read these words: "My name is June. I have nothing. But I love her." Her hands trembled. Her tears flowed. She loved him. It was enough to rekindle a quest. He hired a private investigator. He had them search hospital archives, anonymous birth records, local newspapers, and churches. It was a labyrinth with no way out, until a former pastor from St. Emmanuel's, a certain Reverend Samuel Johnson, remembers a young woman, broken, who cried every evening on the steps of the church. She said her name was June Holloway. She left her baby. And she disappeared. This name. This one name, June Holloway. And it was this name that led Richard, this cold morning of 2022, to the south side of Chicago. To this woman, sitting on a soaked piece of cardboard. To this marked, but familiar, face. To this look. The one who had looked at him, for the very first time, at his birth. Richard didn't hesitate for a single second. When June collapsed in his arms, he understood the moment needed no rational explanation. He didn't ask for a DNA test or official confirmation. The connection was older than blood. He felt it in his bones, in his body memory, in that gaze that had seen him before the world named him. He gave his driver a simple nod. Without a word, the man got out to open the SUV door. Richard gently helped June up. She was swaying, trembling, like a child left outside for too long. Her legs, stiff from the cold and the humiliation of so many years, struggled to walk. But she stepped into the car as if entering a dream, or a forgotten memory of a future ripped from her. Direction: Lake Shore Drive. The journey was silent, interrupted only by the quiet purr of the engine and the furtive glances Richard threw at his mother, who was sitting next to him. She was still holding the photo to her chest, like a talisman. When they arrived in front of the house, a large, modern house overlooking Lake Michigan, June didn't dare go downstairs. "Is this your place?" she whispered. "It's our home now," he replied. She hesitated again. The white stone columns, the immense bay windows, the perfectly manicured garden, all of it seemed like something out of a movie, not her own life. But he held out his hand to her, and she took it. In the days that followed, Richard mobilized his resources. He brought in a personal physician, a nutritionist, a trauma psychologist. They cut her hair, washed her body, and treated her wounds, both visible and invisible. They brought her warm clothes, clean sheets, slippers, books, herbal teas, and silence. But it wasn't material comfort that upset June. It was the look of her son. A look that didn't judge her. That didn't question her about her past, nor her absences, nor her abandonment. He let her be. And that was perhaps the rarest thing in the world. June was afraid of everything. The oversized bed. The touch switches. The food served at set times. And of silence, especially silence, which amplified the voices within her. She sometimes woke up at night with a start, thinking she was still in an alley. She was ashamed to sit on the overly white couches. She always asked permission before entering a room. More Richard never pressed. He was there every day with a cup of coffee or hot chocolate. He would come and sit next to her and, instead of asking her about the past, he would talk to her about his own. "Do you know I was afraid of the dark until I was 12? Did you know I played piano in church, but only when no one was looking?" He made her laugh. Sometimes cry. Sometimes both. And little by little, she too began to speak. Happy days. From Michigan. From her dream of opening a clinic. From the yellow dress she wore the day she gave birth to him. Nights spent singing him to sleep. She hadn't forgotten. Richard was working in his office upstairs. It was late, but a soft light filtered in from the living room. Intrigued, he went downstairs. June was there, sitting in the armchair by the fireplace. A light blanket on her knees, a half-open book in her hands. Her glasses slipped down her nose. She had fallen asleep while reading. The firelight danced across her peaceful face. Richard came over and knelt beside her. He looked at her for a long time. He saw her wrinkles, the traces of a life too hard. But he also saw peace. Relaxation. Acceptance. He placed a hand on hers, and whispered almost without thinking. "Mom." Her eyelids fluttered gently. She opened her eyes, a little confused, then smiled. A real smile. Not a fake smile, nor one of thanks. A mother's smile. And she simply replied, "My son." It was 2 words. But they were enough to heal decades of silence. 6 months later, a day that would forever mark their lives. The winter sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds above Chicago. A large crowd had gathered in a large glass-enclosed conference room in the heart of the financial district. Journalists, photographers, activists, friends, and curious strangers filled the neatly lined rows of seats. In the center, on a luminous platform, stood Richard Coleman. His gaze was sharp but calm, charged with an emotion he had long suppressed. Beside him, seated on a plain but dignified chair, was June Holloway. She wore a simple dress in soft colors and a slight smile on her lips. She looked fragile, but the inner strength that emanated from her captured all the attention. The audience's murmur gradually died down. The cameras focused their lenses, capturing the moment Richard spoke. "Today I want to share a personal truth," he began, his voice calm but full of gravity. "I want to talk about love, resilience, and above all, forgiveness." He paused, met his mother's gaze. "She is not a mistake. She is not a disgrace. She is my source. My root. I have strength." The room erupted in applause, some crying, others nodding silently. I am proud to be his son. Richard went on to announce the creation of a foundation that would now bear his mother's name. June's Hope aims to help homeless women, especially those like my mother who have faced abandonment, poverty, and exclusion. We want to offer them more than a refuge, a second chance, restored dignity, training, psychological support and stable housing. The media covered the event live. The audience was deeply moved by the genuine emotion of both protagonists. Dozens of pledges poured in, volunteers offered their services, and partnerships were quickly established. In the months that followed, June became an unexpected but authentic public figure. Invited to speak at schools, prestigious universities, and TED conferences, she told her story unvarnished. Her voice, soft but firm, evoked abandonment, fear, freezing nights on the street, but also the unsuspected strength she had found within herself. She spoke of survival, of redemption, but above all of love. She reminded the world that behind every homeless woman was a story, a mother, a daughter, a friend. On his 40th birthday, Richard wanted to mark this rebirth with a symbolic gesture. In the main hall of the largest visitor center in June's Hope, he had a bronze statue erected. A woman standing, head held high, proud gaze, holding a child against her, as if to transmit her strength and love. At the foot of the statue, a simple but powerful inscription. Even a queen can fall. But a loving son will raise her up. Asked many times what made him most proud, Richard never talked about his billions or his company's revolutionary innovations. He invariably replied, with a humble smile, "I found my mother. And I put her back on her throne." These words resonated far beyond the walls of glass palaces and meeting rooms. They spoke of humanity, forgiveness, and hope.